Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Enterprise Dish. Aaron is sitting in. I don't even know what that is. It's very.
Home office. We have similar art in our actual office, but
Okay.
this is the home edition.
I like it. I dig it. It's honestly like a really good background for just sort of like things like podcasting.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so
Yeah. So for people who can't see, it's sort of just your, writing street art kind of motif, and it just says Suzuki in Japanese characters, and it's kind of fun.
yeah, no, it's great. Honestly, I've never even thought about using something like that for background, but I'm gonna add that to the repertoire of potential solutions for when we hit it big and we have 17 different studios and I'm in a different place.
Yes.
So, Aaron, as I briefly told you right before this, completely just not physically tore down, but tore down the software stack for the podcast, rebuilt it all up, and the primary reason being is that there was a lot of learning on the initial podcast kind of setup and stack, and a lot of configurations went in, configurations came out, and I'm feeling, knock on wood, relatively stable in the solutions that we have in place. And there was nothing on this computer except the podcast software in the one single folder in OneDrive that I pulled the different assets in from, in the theory that it should hopefully keep things a little bit more stable. But one of the tools that we got here, which Aaron asked briefly, and I will now explain to what it is here, this thing is called a Streamdeck. This is like the Streamdeck XL. And so what this little thing allows you to do, it's basically a really, really fancy macro tool, but it's got some custom software that works across everything, but it allows us to do fun stuff like this, Aaron, and we can just pull up your website.
Yes, that looks familiar.
Yeah, you should probably recognize that. For people who are audio, we pulled up the SmartDeploy website, and once I get a mouse over here, then we could actually scroll around, but I'm still waiting on that to arrive.
So is it like physical buttons, or is it just an LCD?
So it's physical buttons that have little LCDs behind them, and then you can program them to do anything you want, that as long as there's an SDK tied into their software, which it's relatively robust. Now, one of the other reasons I bought this thing, I didn't buy it, but we got the company to buy it, is that Microsoft, through some friends of mine, is working on a Teams SDK integration with this as well.
Yes.
Yeah, right there. There's the business expense for you.
Yes, right, exactly. Yes, I can justify this. Believe it. Oh, that's great. No, that looks like a really sweet device. And Teams, I mean, it's going crazy. We were talking about this at Ignite, right? That Teams is going to take over the universe, and now who knew then that this was going to happen? And now they are.
Yep.
And we're going bigger with it. And so we're recording for the first time using Teams as well, listeners, which is sort of a different change of pace, but it is more or less the same experience as before, because indeed, I believe under the hood, it's still just Skype for Business, right? Or Skype Classic, same blood and guts. So, and that's basically what Teams has crocheted together here, which is great, and it all seems to be clicking along.
Yeah, and it's we've been experimenting with Teams for the podcast on First Ring Daily, because that's kind of our, we do it every day, so we got a lot of chances to kind of figure things out. Had to do a couple different plugs on the back end to make things work, but now again it's working, and it's just, honestly, it's easier for us because we use that application all day long, and now we don't have to jump back between Skype. Like Aaron said, we are now using it for this one, and I believe everybody else who joins this podcast is also going to be able to use Teams as well. So just, once again, just simplifying the stack a little bit, just making life a little bit easier, which is sort of the theme, it sounds like, this week at Build. So Build is kicking off this week, Aaron. There's a bunch of Microsoft stuff. To no surprise, it's Microsoft conference, but there's a lot of Windows stuff. Have you had a chance to look at any of this? Because some of this stuff I think might play perfectly into what you guys do, or at least I'd be interested in your opinion on it.
So somewhat, yeah. I mean, at least at a high level, there's definitely some interesting stuff going on. And speaking of Ignite as well, this WinUI 3-bit sort of was first discussed at Ignite. So there's not a lot of mystery there. But what they're trying to do, flowing everything together with an awesome code name, what is it called? Project something. That there's a unique opportunity here, if it's executed well, to really build one app and have it work everywhere the right way. And we've kind of heard this before, but we know that other organizations execute it well. Consider your Apple ecosystem, where you really have seemingly a better ability to do this, as well as better prepackaged tools which is part of what the promise of some of this WinUI stuff is too. So yeah, we're encouraged, although we kind of were thinking in our camp that UWP was sort of dead. Maybe the undead. And that's not a poke in the eye. I just thought that some of the stuff was kind of falling by the wayside. But maybe, especially in the enterprise, if some organizations committed to this, especially large organizations that have very, very large contracts, there might be some very good reasons for Microsoft to keep some of these bits running. And but there's a lot to unpack in there.
Yes,
I think the incentive is to get people on and keep people on the Windows train as a dev platform. I mean, that's the reason that Microsoft didn't do well in the mobile ecosystem, is they couldn't tie that all out well and make it all work together. And so now the question is, all right, if we're going to keep the PC undead, in spite of the many threats that it was going to die over and over and still has not, how is that going to happen? Well, it's going to happen with a really well-supported, robust, increasingly cross-platform capable, developer platform. And that's exactly, seems to be like what the majority of this whole discussion is about here, right? Is you build once and play it out across the whole universe. I don't know what kind of you pulled out of it. I'm looking at a couple of other notes here. But that's what struck me.
Yeah, I think this is going to be my understanding, and again, we are very early days, folks. Like, we are hours into this, so this is not the gospel or the Bible yet. We will get there, but we're reading through the material that Microsoft has sent our way. So they're calling this Project Reunion, which is, it sounds like they're taking a lot of the UI bits from maybe UWP and then bringing them over to what we consider like Win32, and then they just want Windows apps, because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but typically up until roughly this point, developers wanted to build an app for Windows. They had a choice. They started with Win32 or Windows API, or they went the UWP route. And so now Microsoft is reunioning, did I just make up a word? bringing it all back home. And so it's going to be one common library eventually, we're not there yet, that will give you all the UWP UI enhancements, but all the access to the underpinnings of Windows that, let's be honest, developers really want.
Yeah, so, and such is the promise.
Yes.
And this is preview 1, which, I think is a great way of disclaiming that it's very early, and, you can't really expect or plan for this to be highly reliable or very robust. So this is for energetic early adopters or strategists, enterprise architects, starting to poke around and seeing what the next, moves or waves are going to be, especially as we're all kind of sequestered in our home offices for the foreseeable here. It's plausible that some people would want to start poking around, and this is a great opportunity, especially if build being all virtual now, we're going to be attending this, and you can kind of multitask as you're digesting someone's presentation, be logging onto a website and applying for, registering for, or receiving some bits. So could be kind of an interesting one. We'll see.
Yeah, I think that's an appropriate way to look at it. It's, again, early adopters can go in there and start tinkering around. We got to kind of wait to see. I'm hoping that in the next couple of weeks, Microsoft will maybe give us a roadmap of where they are taking this Project Reunion. We obviously have the WinUI bits coming out now, but what about the rest of the stuff that they hint at is coming along? And the biggest question on my mind, like reading about this, Aaron, is what's the future of the Microsoft Store?
Yes, well, and that's sort of a long story in itself too, right? I mean, I think part of the challenge was when mobile was exploding in the App Store, in the kind of most general sense, became the place where you got software. Microsoft was already so large and well established that they made many app stores, and so there was this conflict over which one and where do you go for what, and that kind of had to get rationalized. And I think it's in a healthier place now, but I think there still remains some of that baggage of, what really is the strategic direction and purpose, and where do we go for this and where do we, not go for that? There are a lot of strategic questions to unfold there, right? And this might be part of the incentive to show up and attend all these build sessions, is to get some of that information and have the opportunity to ask some questions, which is, hopefully they're going to be able to deliver on that promise, even though it's virtual.
My gut, and this is not founded in really anything other than just having been around the Microsoft world for a while, my gut says that the Microsoft Store won't go away, but that the promise of every app in there is sandbox, secure, and a super clean version. You can right mouse click, uninstall it. That stuff might fade away, and it might just become like a discovery and potentially servicing portal for applications going forward.
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, I think the notion that this was going to be like the Apple equivalent of the iTunes App Store or whatever might be the case is just not how it's going to be. I think your assessment there is dead on. Can they rate or assess or put some kind of system in place that gives you a feel for some of that capability? Oh, this is a whatever 5-star app. That means that you have that, right click to uninstall, and
oh, that's an interesting
all the certs and all the security and all the good juice around it. I mean, that's increasingly, privacy is another huge thing to consider with all of this, right? You look at the Android developer tools, and that's the first thing they talk about is privacy, right? So that's another imperative consideration. I'll be curious to see what information comes out of build relative to all of that too, especially in the context of App Store and all the trimmings.
Yep. And then the other thing coming out of build, that this is actually a pretty huge announcement, especially for IT pros around the world, is they have a new package manager. I say that sentence and it's like, what year is it again? Like, Microsoft is finally launching a native package manager for Windows. Like, this is like finally.
Yeah, right. Again, kind of smells and smacks of the Apple world a little bit, right? This nice, universal way to pull all this together. But like we're kind of trying to unwind what that is, and a tool to help you manage your dev tools. Is that what this is, or new territory?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It is going to be open source, so people will be able to poke in and plug around, and it sounds like it's just going to be their version of, hey, you can just use a command line interface, go grab an app, and that's really about it. Although they are promising some vague security features, like coupled into like scanning of apps in the repository. But again, it's not even version 1. It's like preview 1 of build 1 of announcements. So we'll have to get more hands-on time here. But if you like packet managers, this could be good news for you.
Yes, right, exactly. And I think that's the kicker is, who is going to roll up their sleeves and I'll of course be pushing some of our people to do this so that we can come back with a reasonable assessment, because based on where they are is a good indication of where it's going to go, right? If it comes out not rolling too smoothly, well, it might have a bumpy road, and you could expect probably a longer ramp. If it's, delivers on the promise pretty well, you could expect more rapid adoption. It'll make faster progress and in terms of getting more bells and whistles and trimmings, and off it goes. So that's what we're going to be looking for sure.
Yeah, again, this will be one of the things, I'm sure Aaron and I will be bringing this up many times, but we are hours into the announcement. We don't want to push anyone down the wrong road, but it's definitely information that IT pros should be aware of here.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so Aaron, tell me if you've ever heard this one before. I'm not even going to say the KB number. A latest Windows patch number is causing several issues for a large number of people. We ever mentioned this one before?
I mean, this is history repeating, right? I mean, I feel like this is almost every month we have this discussion to a certain extent. We've given it some thought, and as we've discussed multiple times in this great environment that we host here, Windows is unlike any other platform in the world. You could argue, Chrome OS to a certain extent does the same thing, but not to the breadth and scale that Windows does it in terms of device diversity and underlying hardware. And that's part of the source of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking, and to clarify, right, we're talking about the latest KB that has all these recurrent blue screen, white screen, audio issues, font issues. You like the kitchen sink's in there again. But whose fault is it really? I mean, that may be the question. And can we really plan for and expect Microsoft to be so perfectly buttoned up that an update goes out and has no issues? Right. I mean, and I think the reassuring thing on this is they seem to be a little bit isolated, and you're not seeing these, forum discussions super blowing up with, yeah, me too, me too, me too, thousands of times.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be a little bit more isolated, which makes them that much more difficult to resolve. And so then sadly, I think, unfortunately, what a lot of people end up doing to resolve them is uninstalling the patch, which then leaves you exposed to all these security vulnerabilities that you're patching to address in the first place.
Yep.
So that's not necessarily a very good strategy. Part of our assessment around this is, how did you get to where you are? And what I mean by that is not unlike where you started this discussion today. Oh, I just rebuilt my entire rig. Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And learned a lot about, how to not do it in the first iteration, and think I've improved it and kept it ultra clean in this latest iteration. And, how is it running and all that. We suspect that a lot of people are doing in-place 7 to 10 upgrades and leaving a lot of legacy yuck and trimmings in the device and who knows what other software. So part of our fairly strict guidance to our customers is always start fresh.
Yeah.
Don't, when you're creating a new Windows 10 image, build it from the ground up. And you could even see, if you search our support forums, people kind of questioning and challenging and complaining about that. Well, invariably, if people are having problems and it's the reason they complain is it takes time, which, okay, I understand. But if you do that, then the back end is you remove the source of so many potential issues, right? It just removes a ton of questions. And these are the questions that we're asking right now, right? Are these driver conflicts? Is this a weird software bit that's causing this? Is this some weird game they have installed that has some weird graphics problem, or who knows what, right? So that's sort of the thinking. Is we have so many billions of devices spread over multiple generations that got to today from a variety of different paths of, updates and, service packs of old, right? Major updates, minor updates, and monthly patches. That now today, how do we determine what it is? Well, again, this goes back to our philosophy and many enterprises, admittedly, and I would be curious if our listeners kind of buy into this notion that after a certain amount of troubleshooting, policy is that you start over, right? You are basically flattened and re-imaged. And we think that's good policy, right? It's not only efficient in terms of respecting IT's time, it's just good hygiene, right? At the end of the day, and removes all these question marks. So anyway, I got on a little bit of a soapbox there, but that's the lingering question, right? Around some of this.
No, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, that is literally what I did yesterday afternoon. I'm losing track of the days here. Sunday afternoon, I sat down, took my little USB key, plugged it in, did a complete wipe. I actually put a new faster hard drive in for better read speed for the podcast, and then just rebuilt completely from the ground up because I was having just minor issues here and there. And I agree, like you gotta establish a baseline and then see when problems crop up, and that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, and in the enterprise, you have the luxury of scale, right? So if you have, you're buying devices, 200, 500 units at a time, you start running into problems. Well, if only one person's having these problems, what loose policy has allowed them to muck something up, right? Or what did they click on along the way somewhere? And what, time to go look at a few other things before you jump to conclusions about users' bad behavior. But that certainly is invariably, a primary culprit of all this too. So yeah, kind of an odd time. And I think this is going to be a recurrent discussion, right? So I think it's worth a lot of people looking at and pursuing a grand cleanup, I guess I would say, of their strategy and how they're approaching the desktop and the way that they're, I guess, encouraging their end users to behave relative to that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'd like to interject some sort of opinion, but all of my opinion is I agree. Like, it makes sense. Like, it's a smart, it's very easily rationalized, and just in general, a good approach to avoid some of those issues on the back end, because they can get way down in the weeds and you can search all you want, and just flattening and redoing it again is just the best decision.
Yeah. And I think increasingly there's less risk nowadays. You got, if you use something like Microsoft 365, and you're using all the tools, OneDrive and things like that, restarting with your desktop becomes a faster proposition. So your ability to keep things up to date and having, frequent refresh as a part of your IT process is really sustainable and not overly disruptive for end users. Now, there are a lot of different cultures organizationally, and a lot of different policies, and different industries have different standards. Not everyone's going to be a candidate to take advantage of all the trimmings of M365. Yep. But those that can, I think, will enjoy a faster return to productivity and less disruption that makes all of this all the more capable. So something to consider.
Something else people should consider is that, Aaron, you guys announced, you guys meaning SmartDeploy, announced this week an offer for, I believe it's the education sector using your software. You want to just kind of tell us about that real quick?
Yeah, so we want people to be able to get work from home done. And the other thing that we're seeing now, we extended a free offer to education. This is, K-12 and higher ed and anyone in between that runs a school or an institution. And we are seeing some interesting things emerge with the pandemic. And one of them, especially in education, is that with summer coming, and now we're starting to talk about reopening, and some places are having this, and even here where they've, we're the first ones to kind of see scale infection and what have you. I'm starting to talk about this and see some reopening. So everyone's getting very excited. Feedback from our customers is, okay, typically summertime is when we undertake a lot of these projects and we reimage everything and we start the school year fresh. Well, everyone's been out of school, and the great fear is that there will be summer school, it will be open, and because parents have been strained by having to basically homeschool their children or have very limited remote learning provided by their school districts, that summer school enrollment is going to be massive. And so this onslaught of attendance is concerning to a lot of IT people. Sure. So we extended this free offer through, I think it's through July, which would give people who, have budgetary constraints, budget freezes, or just no ability to get an approval or even drive a sensible evaluation process that would hinge on some funding to be able to use the product and get a project done ahead of everything kind of getting chaotic and missing out potentially on this summertime window to do all this work. So that was part of the motivation. And, I would, marketing team probably wouldn't like this, but people who are in a pinch and really want to, seek the support of our organization, feel free to reach out. And, you could mention Enterprise Dish or just mention that I said something, and we'll be able to work out a way to get you up and running with the system for sure.
No, I think that's great. Along that very same line, I'm very curious to see what's going to happen when school does return. For example, my daughter is in first grade. They use computers, but they don't really have one. Like, they're not assigned one. I'm curious, at her school, it starts in the fourth grade when that really kind of ramps up. I'm curious if we're going to see that downward progression of, hey, X child needs Y machine at school. in case we're ever in this sort of scenario again. That way they're not scrambling to kind of spin everyone back up again, or if they're going to have new types of contingency plans to deal with this new like remote learning experiences that everyone's dealing with.
This is the multi-billion-dollar question in education right now. So I am acquainted with a number of different educators and administrators in K-12 and higher ed who are having lots of crazy discussions.
Sure.
Crazy discussions. As you know, especially in colleges and universities, so much of their effort and attention is driven to infrastructure, right? Yeah. What is the construction project? What's the construction roadmap? What's the new building? What are we raising money for? And it's always some big infrastructure related thing. So much of the benchmark of a university president's performance, at least in hindsight, is, oh, they made these things happen. And it's always some big tangible research facility, new, whatever, hall of this or that, redid the entire quad, whatever. I've been involved in discussions where they are rethinking that and saying, well, we were able to transition the administration that thought really had to be together physically to 100% work from home. Do we really need to use one of the central facilities on campus that requires you to pay for parking, most expensive real estate in whatever, not only the entire campus, but possibly the entire city and series of towns surrounding some of these larger schools, and lock it up this way? Or can we direct the money to other strategic projects and turn that into instruction, right? I mean, things like that. And even relative to instruction, boy, this is working well. What are our students going to think? They're getting all this done now, living at home or whatever their changed circumstances are. So there's a ton of thinking about this. In K-12, we see a lot of schools, and I'm sure, and I would be curious for listener feedback on this as well, but I'm sure they would largely agree, you're seeing sort of a segmentation of computing in the classroom. So a lot of carts with Chromebooks on them, and then a lab with PCs, and maybe another lab with Macs, and certain ages get iPads, and whatever might be the case, it's very heterogeneous. And in a environment where we may be looking at longer term distance learning or recurrent distance learning, as you pointed out, Brad, what is the right strategy and where should that investment be? And is sort of this heterogeneous approach really the best way? The Common Core standards in the US specify a certain degree of proficiency with a keyboard and with core productivity software. That's part of the K-12 educational system in the US now. So what does that mean, and how does that translate increasingly to distance learning, right? There are a ton of these questions, and meanwhile, IT is just looking at it saying, well, the clock all of a sudden got shorter, and I've just been trying to get people working from home and getting, whatever our video presentation apps working and getting all this stuff going, and now I've got to think about re-imaging everything district-wide. I mean, they're going bananas. So it is a precarious time, I would say, for education right now, and almost certainly this will be one of the places that we'll see shaped years into the future based on what's happening right now.
Absolutely, it is. I know it's real easy to say this is unprecedented, but now that it's happened once, like, you have to be prepared for it to happen again. People, I think, are going to be much more willing to say, hey, we have to build this in the contingency plan. There's no question about it. And so,
and is this a model that you could snap to easily in the event of, wildfires in the West, big crazy tropical storms in the Southeast, whatever might be the case, devastating tornadoes in the Midwest. It could be any variety of things that have us say, great, we're going to work from home for the next X number of weeks, right? It may not be indefinitely as it is now, but it could be a very reasonable and easy alternative, because this is something that's being validated in real time. And I think to many people's surprise, it's working. and surprisingly well. So I know that there are many, many examples of failure too, and a lot of
Sure.
people are really frustrated and disappointed, and
Yep.
millions and millions and millions who have no work whatsoever. So that is a very challenging situation to be in. But for those of us who are able to do this, here we are, right? And it's going, and kids are still learning. So is there talk of going back to school where you are, Brad? I mean, how is that progressing?
It's honestly, it's a big unknown.
Really?
Yeah. I think it's going to depend. I mean, we just don't quite know, because if we're over the hump, which we all kind of hope we are, then it seems more plausible. But I even think that, let's just say we take the most optimistic route possible back, in that, we're on the downward trajectory, but there's still this lingering fear of, hey, there's going to be a reprisal of it in the fall or as people get back together. And so I think what we've heard locally, at least from our schools, is like masks are probably going to be required, at least for now. Thankfully, where my daughter goes to school, they have lots of space. And so the talk is potentially that, hey, maybe kids come every other day. Like if you're the first part of the alphabet, you come on a Monday and a Thursday or whatever. So there's just a lot of unknowns. Nothing definitive has been laid out yet. But actually, my kid ended school last week. She's now technically on summer vacation, which to a first grader probably feels a lot like last week, because right? I mean, it's
Exactly.
it's not like she was doing algebra and like doing all these math problems. I mean, granted, she had work and she had schoolwork and Spanish and all that good stuff, but she's not. It's a half day of schooling and a half day of playing at first grade. So
Yeah, it'll be these are sort of the interesting points of how it's going to go, and we're now crafting our return to the office plans.
Sure.
We're not yet able to, as far as state requirements go, where we are. Some of our employees are in other places where they potentially could, but it's really sort of a daunting task, right, to know how far to push it. And I think this is the same thing plaguing, not only us and our industry and our geography, but everyone everywhere, and also extending into other sort of less traditional business environments like schools and education. It's going to be a wild, wild road ahead, and that has massive implications for IT and all of our listeners, for sure. Crazy to think about.
it really does. It's the plan is being written as we're taking steps forward, and we'll be watching how it goes. But Aaron, we very much appreciate you taking time out, one, not only to show off your cool artwork, by the way, but to talk IT, to talk things that are going on with Build, and to everybody else. The offer that Aaron talked about for education, we'll drop a link down below in the blog post. Make sure to reach out if you guys have any questions, and we'll catch all of you right back here next time.